Dzień dobry. Dzień dobry, panie profesorze.
Hello and welcome. Good evening, everyone.
Dzień dobry, szanowni państwo. Witam państwa
Hello and welcome
z nami na sali.
all of you
Osoby, które
who are here with us in the room, in the audience, our all online attendees, and our panelists.
Dzisiaj
Today
mamy blok
we are going to talk during this cross-border cooperation congress to discuss culture. And we are starting with the youth. As you know, Lublin is the first Polish city ever that is going to be the European Youth Capital in 2023. So this title has been held by Lublin for several months. And today we are going to talk about the culture for young people and young people in culture. This discussion will be moderated by Assistant Professor Piotr Marecki from the Institute of Culture and head of the UB Lab at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. Hello and welcome. Good evening, everyone, once again, and thank you for inviting me to this Congress. And as participants, we'll have Marjana Sawka, poet, co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Stary Lion Publishing House in Ukraine. Birute Marcinkieviciute-Mar, actress, theatre director and writer, artistic director of SOLO THEATRAS in Vilnius, Lithuania. Yevgenia Pasternak, writer of prose books for young people and teenagers from Belarus. And Andriej Żwalewski, writer, screenwriter and playwright, also from Belarus. So let's be starting, Professor. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you for this introduction, and I really count on a lively discussion here. Next to panelists, we are hosting a number of people in the room. I would encourage all of you to give your voice, take the floor, especially that we've got representatives from the generations that we are going to talk about. And most importantly, I can see from the badges that we all wear, these are people not only from Poland, but from Ukraine, from the countries that are of interest for the Congress debate, so we are counting on you. We believe that you are experts. It's you who experience as young people all those matters, all those issues, all those topics that we are going to discuss in a while. So on one side, I'm involved in, I deal with culture, contemporary literature, current affairs, but predominantly digital media, and I will be referring to digital media all the time. I think this is something that is very characteristic of the youngest generations nowadays. But before I begin our debate, let me talk about the basic issues, so that we can think about the language, the terms, the concepts defining the young generation. We know that young generations use images in communication more than text. So we'll have pictures, images accompanied our discussion. So please, let's have the first one displayed on the screen. We'll be talking about two generations, millennials, Generation Y, and Generation Z, or Zoomers. Frequently, well, in Poland, there are at least people from those generations use the English terms. That is a millennial or Gen Z, rather than even Generation Z. So, of course, millennials are people born in the 80s and early 90s, the 20th century, different limits given different boundaries up to 1997. And Gen Z people are the last the generation in in the as far as the letters in the alphabet go. So people born in the late 90s up to 2012. So at this moment, the 2000 people born in 2001 came to universities this year. So millennials, kind of ceased to be the young generation, so to say, and Gen Z is taking over. That's a fact. So these people are the youth, and from my talks with the students at Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and I've got students from many countries: Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, Ukraine. They use these terms, and the first question before to all the panelists. The first question is there, at the level of the generation terms, do you see any differences in the countries, in the cultures, in the traditions that you represent? Do young people in your countries, define themselves using these terms, or perhaps they use English language, the Gen Y or Gen Z, or perhaps they use some new terms? Are these terms adequate to the experience of those born in those periods? And I would risk, calling them, for the purposes of this discussion, as the young generations. What's the situation in your countries? I'm really interested in hearing your voice. So let's start with Marjana Sawka from Ukraine. Sorry, we can't hear you.
Добрый вечер. Вы меня уже слышите? У нас русский рабочий язык.
Okay, hello, good evening.
Тогда.
Okay, so I understand I can use Russian as the conference language. So, yeah, let's start with the two generations, the millennials and Z generation, or Gen Z, or Zoomers. Is there any difference between the two? Of course there is. We are all born in different information realities, so to say, and the date of birth really matters. The age at which the information system began impacting us. This makes a difference as for upbringing and mentality of people from the two generations. As an editor in my team, and my team is composed of more than 100 people, we've got a lot of millennials, there's young people who work, who have jobs, they are young experts, they are those born in the 90s, 1997, 1996. So I can say that the main characteristic or main feature of these people, from my point of view, is that they are rather practical, pragmatic in their approaches, in their attitudes, in their behaviors. Recently, I had a talk with a friend from my generation, and we agreed that young people are rarely romantic. So this is a moment, this is a point when, as writers, as those from the older generation, so to say, it is a moment for us to decide what attitude should we take towards them. In practice, these young people, they react very rapidly. They change dynamically in what they do, in how they behave. If they don't like something, they can change jobs within a minute. Once they become disinterested, they change the profession because suddenly they decide that they would be more successful in a different field, or they will get more satisfaction from a different field, or they will earn more money in something different. So these people read a lot, I must say. They read books with huge motivation to do so. A large part of those know literature very well, oriented in non-fiction, and they are quite ready, quite willing to enter the normal life or adult life, but they expect a lot from the lives, and they want at the same time, I mean, immediately. They don't want to wait for anything. They are impatient. They, again, immediate result is what they expect. So if we are to talk about even younger generations, that is the youngest generation, the Zoomers, I think that still there are differences. These are different people. They were born in the digital era, so to say, in full progress. So they have different perceptions of the world. These are people who respond very, very quickly as users of the digital media, of the digital technologies. They learn very quickly, but there's a moment when they encounter certain limits, or they have the barriers. They don't want to go under the surface or in depth into the knowledge. So they are, gadget users. They think through gadgets, so to say. So as readers, they tend to pick up what's first about picture, about an image, rather than text. So, I have spoken to librarians, the head of one of the biggest libraries in Ukraine, and we know that manga is the style that these people pick up most often. The whole history or mentality of manga that extends over all the field of their interests. This is how they get information. There is a relatively big segment in literature for children, for people from this generation. So I cannot say that as a share, these would account for for the majority, but even if the number of publications is limited, it tells you that the users, the consumers, are Gen Z people. The people who are interested in reading, starting from the very early childhoods. But again, this is a limited segment. So, okay, now Yevgenia Pasternak and Andriej Żwalewski. The same question goes to you, our guest from Belarus.
Да. Нас слышно?
Так, сłychać.
Хорошо. Нам кажется, что деление на миллениалов и
We think that to kind of classify the young people into Gen Y and Gen Z is very general. I mean, people and children they change their attitudes every 5 years, I could say. So every 5 years we have different people. Meet a sixth grader in 2010 and 2016. These are two different, persons. And you need to take a different approach when talking to them. So we kind of are used to treating the millennials as adults. So, these are people who have their own children. You have perhaps, attend the schools. So they are difficult to deal with as parents, I must say. And it's because they are very demanding. They are very exacting people, I could say. They have the ideas about upbringing the children and so on. As for Gen Z people, the differences can be seen quite clearly in the elementary school. Well, still another, or the youngest generation is the Alpha generation, as we call them. In the educational system, which is outdated in Belarus, as we can see it, actually, these youngest generations defeat the systems. These are children who have been brought up with mobile phones in their hands. They have access to the internet. They are online all the time. They don't know any other life. They have never imagined information could be obtained other than by a single click on the keyboard or on the touch screen. So really, you need to be thinking very fast to catch up with them. They are really fast in what they do, in how they think. So and this generational classification, devised by marketing people, and I must say, must be approached with caution. I mean, the more we develop as societies, the more differences there are. You can observe that hands-on. I remember the Soviet times. In our generation, we just wore the same things, the same clothing. We got the same hobbies and so on. We simply had no choice. It was a monolith as a generation. And today, the characteristic feature of young people is the very difference between them. So within the generation, there's a variety of approaches. In a single classroom, they have different hobbies, different values that they follow, different viewpoints, and so on. So somehow, there can be a common denominator, but you need to be very cautious, very careful in doing so. All right, thank you very much. Birute Mar, why don't you give us your opinion?
Mikrofon jest niewłączony. Poprosimy o włączenie mikrofonu.
Can you start your microphone, please? Ну, я как бы не работаю так в просвещении и не делаю никаких там статистик. Я могу говорить из своего опыта.
Well, I don't keep any statistics.
Отвечаю со спектаклями в школы и книги пишу.
I
Даже понять.
I do performances at school. I write books, and I try to understand all the time how this is received by these generations. For me, this way, how these people grow up to the age of 8, when the child's imagination is still wide open. How can you say put something in them? But later on, during adolescence, young people get closed. And just like my friend said, the children of our generation, they came through this transformation from the Soviet Union until into new country, new era. So they didn't have so many opportunities as now. Life has changed. Today, millennials, they are very practical. There are also different groups here. Those who followed a model of parents trying to work their way up, accumulating wealth. Those who are liberal and very practical. And the other ones who migrated, they didn't have any models to follow. Of course, they wanted to have a better life, but they were looking for a better life elsewhere. And this generation now, they want things here and now. They don't have time to work hard. And we were taught to apply yourself to work, that you have to work, develop. This new generation, you stop paying money, they will quit. Of course, there are always some individual exceptions. And this new generation Z, we don't know exactly what they will be like, but they are kind of passive. They are flooded with information. They think very quickly. You ask them a question like, what would you like to do in your life? Who would you like to be? And they don't know what to say. So I ask myself, how come? When I was at school, I wanted so much to do so many things. I had so many plans. I wanted to be an actress, write books. I read many books. So with this amount of information they have today, they become passive. They are kind of helpless. And one of my students who also studies at music school, and I say, why are you so mature? And he said, because I play every day, and when I play the piano, I meet myself. I can have a look inside me. And this new generation, they do not meet themselves. They forget about themselves. They have so much information around them. And those people, if you had classes with students online, they were afraid, very often afraid to speak online, to take the floor. And there are very serious restrictions in Lithuania. All these green passes or COVID passports. You cannot go to university without this passport. And in Vilnius, people wait in a line to get their passports, and these passports are checked on a regular basis.
таким страхом, лице прям не очень, прям никто бы не
Would we have waited in a line, so scared?
знаю.
I don't think so. I don't know how to put it,
Это опять ложь.
but where does this fear come from among these young people? So we struggled for freedom,
Делать то, что они будут. Вот такое ощущение.
and now they seem to be following what others tell them to do. And this passive approach, this is a very sad experience to see.
W tych wszystkich głosach poruszonych
Well,
zostało bardzo wiele tematów.
we've had a number of different subjects touched upon, and you're all true, you're all right about these new generations, but let's sort it out a bit. We have this picture. It's a meme, a comparison of characteristic features of Gen Z, millennials. Of course, digital media is something characteristic of these generations. They are digital natives.
Te pokolenia wychowały się z mediami
They were born with the media, they have grown with the media,
cyfrowymi,
digital media, and the question is how they
informacją, także
cope with information, digital information. That's my second question.
ekspertów, tu widzimy, że milenialsi to było takie pokolenie
We know that millennials
takich trochę boomerów,
were kind of digital boomers. They didn't really
umieli, za bardzo wierzyli.
know, they didn't really trust the new digital media,
Tego pokolenie, które
so they are
wszystko, wszystkie swoje prywatne sprawy,
they are the first generation to share everything online, private pictures, pets, interests, just perhaps out of vanity. So they were the first victims of this digital era,
w sposób radziło sobie z tym nadmiarem
but still they somehow were able to manage all these stimuli. They fought those stimuli quite effectively. They had to deal with two screens at the same time, while Gen Z has to cope with up to 5 screens at the same time. And Gen Z are those who are, of course, a bit more professional with the digital media. They're not willing to share so much information. They know how this huge capitalism, platform-based capitalism works. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Uber. They know how much money they make out of these young people's activity online. And this generation is more aware of certain threats, certain processes online. They are aware of threats to the planet, also coming from excessive use of digital media.
skierować pytanie do naszych ekspertów o taką ocenę
So my question is about your evaluation
urządzeń,
of the role of devices, screens, information.
nie wiem, jawnie potępić,
Should we condemn it openly,
może szukać tutaj
or should we look for good and bad sides,
rozmawiać o jakichś
or maybe talk about some ways
obrony, mechanizmów obronnych.
of defending ourselves against it?
Zmiany zostało pokolenie alfa, bo rzeczywiście
And there is this generation alpha that we're talking about now, that is going to follow Gen Z, because we have to start the alphabet right away. So what about them? What kind of threats and risks are there?
jak mówię, plusów i minusów.
What are the pros and cons of digital media?
Od pani Birute.
Perhaps Birute, you can take the floor.
Ой, давайте. Так-то я такие масс-медиа не очень компетентна.
I don't know if I'm competent enough to talk about the media, digital media. Perhaps we can pick another subject.
To może ktoś inny z naszych
So perhaps someone else from our online guests would like to take the floor, please.
postrzegacie tę rolę.
What do you think is this role of devices, information?
Yevgenia Pasternak,
Yevgenia, Andriej?
Знаете, можно много говорить о том, хорошо это или плохо, то, что у наших
Well, we can, of course,
детей есть
keep discussing whether this is right or wrong, whether
это не меняет
the children have access to internet. Is this a good access? And this access is there, and we cannot stop it, whether we like it or not. We can limit the time of accessing the internet, especially with young children that are more dependent from parents. So it's not easy for us to discuss the disadvantages of gadgets, devices, or the internet. We are here talking online, so it means internet is good. We have almost unlimited possibilities. And our role as representatives of a bit older generation, our role is to show kids that devices and the internet are only tools. You can use these tools in a number of ways. There can be good and bad ways of using them, like of any other thing. Of course, we can learn about the world, learn languages, talk to people. You can have a hobby. I mean, we understand also now how limited we were about our choices in the past, in the times when the internet was short, was limited. We were not able to find friends. And today, the internet, of course, has also different traps that children can fall into. But we adults, we can and we should teach children to use the internet wisely and show the certain problems that maybe we have experienced with the internet, maybe share our own experience, and we can learn from children as well, because they are certainly more fluent, more proficient in this communication, and they grasp things quickly, and they know different ways of using those digital tools, because these tools have been around since they were born. They press the buttons quicker, they use the keyboard quicker, which can be a shock. We also sometimes run typing courses, and my students say, we can type the subject of the class faster on my phone than you. So we are sometimes jealous. On the other hand, also really shocked, and we can't really tell how to handle this. But when you have to produce a text, edit text, they have a real problem with that. Children, youth, they can't read comments to text or glosses. We used to have word processing courses, and this was for upper grade children. They were, of course, very quick about writing on a keyboard, but when they started to produce text in a word processing tool, their options were limited. They didn't know what to do with this. Well, the internet, the new media are only tools, like an axe. You can kill someone, or you can cut a tree and build a house with an axe. So you can't say the internet is right or wrong. Everybody uses ways to influence children, like we scare some, we try to frighten children with the internet. We had the same problem with video games, different shootouts or shooting games where you have a real threat, when you have to kill someone. So there were statistics showing that many youngsters were not able to tell the difference between the game and reality. And when we had anime with sexual content, that led to a situation where young people, actually sexual violence was reduced among young people. There was a wave of suicides in Russia some time ago, and some people claimed that it had been due to the impact of social media, but the actual research done, and I was part of this project, showed that the social media had been rather supportive to children and couldn't have been blamed for suicidal behavior. So internet is a tool. You can hurt someone or you can support someone with it.
Right, but I wouldn't agree that these are only tools that we can simply use and put aside. And the research shows that media is also something that shapes our perceptions of the world, our viewpoints. It's even the physical impact that they have on our bodies, even the shape of our brains, the receptors. Scientific research shows that, depending on the amount of information that we need to take in. But don't let me go this way. I would just mention that it's not, a tool. These are not tools that would be just transparent, that we just put aside and and forget them. It is a bit more complicated. But Marjana Sawka, what's your opinion about that? Thank you. I also think that the social media is not only about tools that we can use. It's the whole environment that affects not only young generations but also adults. And you can see changes in consumer behaviors, consumer philosophies. In the readership, during the pandemic, all market behaviors, went online, and there are trends showing the changes. And yes, I would agree that your brain gets changed, regardless of your age, and especially with the young children who spend all the time online. They kind of shape their own global network and the ways it operates. We have a discussion. We are having a discussion just now, and.
Можу, так? Якщо я можу говорити українською.
Sorry,
Так, дякую дуже.
there were some technical problems.
І в різних країнах.
Okay, so we are having the debate just now, and when we talk about different generations of young people in Ukraine, Lithuania, or Belarus, then the youngest generation, the Z generation, is online. This is a single community, regardless of nationality. There are more features that they share between them than with their parents. or siblings. So it's unimaginable to us, but there's a completely different life that they have. Our philosophy is one of internet consumers. As our colleagues from Belarus said, this is a tool for us, but for our children, it's a whole environment, that they live in. So on one hand, there are a lot of positives. For instance, in Ukraine, there has been a huge growth in digital technology. A number of processes have been digitalized, facilitated by disruptive technologies. When you go to travel by underground, you have touch screens. You don't have to buy tickets. You pay online, electronically, and so on. Any municipal services you pay online, and that's it. So it's a great facilitation in our lives. And mind you, children source information very, very fast. My son keeps asking me, why should I be going to school when I can get information from the internet? I mean, it's not surprising to me. He can get so many pieces of information, so much knowledge from the internet that seems quite natural. But on the other hand, there's a risk, there's a threat to the continuity of the communication channels between the generations. In a while, we'll cease to understand what the youngest generations actually think, why they think so, why they act the way they are. We can learn about internet or online models that they would adapt to, like TikTok or the Instagram, any other the channels. The disruption in communication between generations is a risk. Thank you for this opinion. I have prepared 4 more pictures. Let me show them all in a row. Our discussion is lively and heated. And still, there are 5 screens, behind me. So, I think that there will be questions from the room, from the audiences as well. And we have only half an hour left. So let's move on to the next topic, kind of softness of these generations. And I use the term used in one of the pictures that I'm going to show you. This is a quite interesting illustration of these generations. I think this picture is about representation of the Gen Z, the people, and Gen Y. They overlap in certain aspects, but they also are in opposition in other aspects. They tend to fight with each other from time to time. The statement here, why is my life so expensive and I don't get satisfaction from it? That's the subtitle for it. And you mentioned that Gen Z and Gen Y respond to their jobs, to their work. And of course, all the generations, we had to struggle for your freedom, for your opportunities that you are now not utilizing. You simply stay in your bed, you are eaten up by depression, you have so much freedom that you don't do anything with. The values that we have fought for, that we went to prison for, it's all this is wasted on you. So the response that we get them is, okay, boomer, and that's it. So they even don't start, to talk. They don't get into a discussion. So this picture perhaps is the best illustration of this approach. So let's have the next one. I used the term softness of these generations. So if you browse the internet, if you Gen Z typed in Google, the first phrases is why is this generation so soft, but also kind of mentally toxic or disabled or sick even. And the last picture and the word that is immediately associated with that is depression or mental diseases, mental burden, coping with overstimulation. This is the picture about how Gen Z try to fight depression, cope with depression, the flower that you cannot destroy. I've got some research results from this year that perhaps I should quote at this cross-border cooperation congress, so about the neurotic post-COVID generations in Eastern Europe. And the authors of the research, this research was carried out among students from Poland and Ukraine. Unfortunately, no other countries represented in the study. So the high neuroticism, educational burnout, among 61% of Polish students. And we all know this. We can observe that, personally at universities. This is quite an obvious thing. So now everyone is talking about, on-site the education, and we mentioned the digital media and how the digital contact and so much time spent by students in remote learning, how much it affected their mental health. And for Ukrainian students, it's 47%. So they are more resilient. They are more resistant to the evil coming from digital media and online learning, and the COVID related communication contacts the ways have brought about. So let's try to discuss these the issues. You said that the young generations are kind of lively, energetic, ambitious. So how does it contrast with this softness, the depressive, passive the people? What's your opinions, or what's your advice you would give as representatives of the older generations for the younger ones to cope with? And after that, we'll have the Q&A session, an open debate. Any one of you who'd like to take floor? Birute Mar?
Я бы сказала, что одна из причин
I would say that one of the reasons is that, the pandemic caused the first stress ever to these people. It was the first ever stressful situation in the lives of young generations. So if you have a look at the responses or reactions, I think I can see how they respond to the stressful situations. They are, with the first difficulties that they encounter, love situations, any difficulties, they will go to a therapist. I mean, they don't accept any negative experience in their lives. They are afraid of these. Everything should be positive for them. If there's anything that goes down or breaks down, they don't want to accept it at all. So,
и такая цель мне всегда
in my meetings with young people, in my encounters, I would like to teach them, how to accept any moments that they may have in their lives, that is whether negative or positive. And they have really high difficulties in accepting the complication that life carries with it. And it's a result
необходимости бороться
of
чем препятствиями.
of the deprivation of this sense of the struggle, of the fight for their lives.
Pani Marjana Sawka podniosła
Marjana Sawka, would you like to take the floor?
Я думаю, что очень зависит от,
I think that it depends very much on the level of
обеспеченности каждого конкретного человека и, скажем, и даже страны.
on the level of sense of security or wealth of specific persons, but also countries. So, if we are to talk about our generation, then if you know what hungry 90s are, or what it means to be part of the big Soviet colony, and then what it means to regain independence and sovereignty, and then to know what it means, what's the Great Depression in a country that has regained independence but do not know what to do with it. And next step, and any step is a step against the wind. Then you get some resilience. You get some, you develop a spine. So people from the post-Soviet area could observe personally that people very well off with social welfare still struggled with high level of stressful situations. That's people who had everything still had problems with themselves, with their mental health. So this is a model, this is a pattern, I would say, that tells you that you will need to face troubles sometime in your life. Now that these new generations don't have to fight anything, don't have to struggle with anything, they were born to a free country, to an independent country, and they kind of get into some vacuum. It's freedom, but it's a vacuum. I mean, one day is enough for them to be deprived of the freedoms they are used to, like in the pandemic times. So, mind you, being online, being on the internet is a kind of another level, meta level of freedom. So it's very interesting to see how the young generations, have lived through, or would live through, the breakdown of Facebook. 6 hours without Facebook a couple of days ago. Perhaps the results or the effects could be unimaginable for us. And these people, young generations, are very dependent on the social media, and again, they want to have instantaneous access to information, instantaneous contact with people they want to communicate with, and if there's no possibility for them to do so, they may experience breakdown. It can be really damaging to them. So during the pandemic, the level of mental stresses and disturbances and disorders has grown significantly. At the very beginning, we observed a rise in demand for books, simply an increase in readership of books. So books offered a kind of territory of stability where people looked to get this sense of security. So you get this sense of insecurity nowadays, and the young generation still actually looked within the community, in TikTok, in other social media, where they could feel secure again, or less insecure, I would say.
Bardzo dziękuję i poprosimy jeszcze o wypowiedź naszych gości.
Thank you very much. Perhaps our guests from Belarus could have their opinion as well. Thank you. Yes, of course, we understand how much it depends on the social the context. Today in Belarus, this is a struggle for freedom, we must say. And the social protests in Belarus, what was characteristic about them, there was no single group that would oppose. It wasn't, specifically students who protested, like in Paris in '68. These were, pensioners, workers, students, everyone, basically. Every social group was involved. And after a year of this struggle, I think that millennials or Gen Y actually took the highest blow, the strongest blow from the regime. I think that there are no official statistics, but from my estimation, 600 people from that generation are in prisons. A large share of activists are from these generations. And as for Gen Z, they were most prominent in August in 2020, but they got disappointed, really. The truth is that it's not a product of today. It's not a product of contemporary times. It didn't stay yesterday or today. If you recall Stephen's the poem, and I do not believe in the values of those youth who don't shave their beards, then young generations will always be soft somehow or weak somehow. These are the rules of nature, so to say. The other point is that the problems of young generations grow, and the age changes when you are still defined as young people. Now, if you are 20, you are an adult, and 100 years ago you still were very, very young. And mind you, to refer to what you said, we are at different levels of going out of the post-Soviet reality. We are just at the beginning in Belarus, at the beginning on this way. We didn't have any problems with coronavirus. We didn't have any lockdown. Our children went to school. No online learning experience, not a single day. So we kept on working, learning as usual, and everything was opened. So what you believe to be effects of the lockdown, we can observe this in Belarus as well. We see that our children became passive somehow, inactive, and that they are weak. Show no initiative, show no energy. And as our colleague from Lithuania said, okay, they come to school and they don't know who they want to be, where they want to go, and so on. And, for those who remember the Soviet times, well, we would have dreamed about such opportunities. We always wanted to beat the consequences of the totalitarian system. So our children are so passive, this is the proper word to name it, because this totalitarianism still continues in Belarus. The Soviet-style educational system is oppressive to our children. So in Belarus, the reasons are different. Okay, as you said, we had a lockdown for 6 months, and children, stayed home for 6 months. And I think that, this is true. I mean, we had the feeling that the Soviet times are back. And as you say, there was no lockdown in Belarus, but it can be observed everywhere. So perhaps children, were there in social networks and in the social media. So the information must have had some impact on them. So this, fear from the negative climate, negative atmosphere, which was omnipresent, I would say, for 6 months in our country. The level of depression and the cases of depression among our friends, among our acquaintances, in families, grew hugely. I personally had some, mental problems as well. All right. Thank you very much for your input and your contributions. We still have a quarter for the open discussions. For open debates, I especially would like to encourage representatives of Gen Y and Gen Z to ask the questions. Mind you, we've got all online attendees, so please ask questions via online tools. The first question from our guests is, what are the topics for the children books that you are writing? What topics are of the highest interest for the children and youth from your countries? And let me modify this question for Yevgenia Pasternak. Before our debate, we had a talk, and you said that frequently in your books, or published in Belarus, in Russia, the protagonists, the heroes are passive. As opposed to the protagonists in popular literature, or U.S. style the protagonists, who are really active. Could you just elaborate on that, please?
Да, только я писала не о книгах, которые публикуются, а о том, что пишут наши молодые.
Well, certainly, I've been writing about not necessarily books that are published, but about what they write. Online, we sometimes call it network literature. So this is not published, but it's available online, and young people access it and read it. 3 years ago, we traveled to the United States, and we were surprised to see dystopic literature being quite popular, where young people save the world. They have those dark, gloomy covers and stories where a group of teenagers fight with some evil, and adults are usually immature, unreliable, and the young save the world, while the old can't do it because they are involved in something completely different or strange. We don't have this kind of literature. The most popular literature we have is fantasy, but it's not science fiction or it's fantasy. I hope you can feel the difference. It's all about maybe escaping from reality. Fairy tales are not enough anymore. So they write and read fantasy. This is kind of softer. There is nothing about saving the world. This is, of course, outside our reality. It's all about adventure.
Dziękuję. Kto z Państwa jeszcze chciałby odpowiedzieć na
Thank you. Who else would like to take this question?
tematy książek?
The subjects of books or themes, popular themes among children's books.
Видавництво Старого издательство Старого Лева. Могу сказать, что у нас достаточно большая часть литературы для детей.
Well, there is quite an abundant literature, children's literature, and I think the most faithful readers are aged 10, 12, and they read a lot. They also read fantasy, but you know, this kind of fairy tale level fantasy, that's the first choice. And later they a lot of not fiction. That's the latest trend in Ukraine. These are books about black holes, about the universe, ecology, some kind of scientific stuff. This is what attracts them. And these books later on, and these books also are supplemented by psychology content, so they have their own ways. Children, the youth, go through some hard time, some problems. Sometimes they find answers in books. Of course, it's always challenging to find a book which is intimate, which is sensitive. Sometimes they hide the titles, the authors they read. They don't want to reveal what they read about. They, for example, reach for books about loss, about family problems, domestic problems, about divorce, books concerning LGBT, so rather intimate, rather private stuff. And this is when children pick books online, and they buy online. And this also shapes the book market in general. So there is this pressure of the internet on our lives, and that's the fact. That's why children look for inspiration there. And sometimes we have those book clubs or reader clubs, often operating within libraries, and children who attend such clubs, such meetings, they usually pick books that they find interesting. But this is kind of legal. I mean, this is open because usually the whole group discusses a book in the club, and more such clubs, I think, occur in local libraries. Thank you. Birute, what about you?
Я сама пишу книги для детей как бы такого 1-4 класса, но у меня такое, вот я выбрала писать для детей, как для взрослых, как для детей.
I look at books for children between the 1st and 4th grade. I remember a children's book contest. This is where I submitted my work, and the jury they were not sure really who is the target audience. They didn't know because they found this book too demanding for children at this age. One of the members of the jury said that the age of the child becomes very vague. This idea of age is no longer applicable among children. Now we can see that the child in the first grade can understand something else. An adult reading the same book can understand something else. So this is fascinating how we can write for children and adults. It's like a therapy for all.
Dziękuję. Mamy jeszcze...
Thank you. We have just a couple of minutes left to hear from you. So please, dear audience here on site, would you like to ask something or make a comment?
Jeszcze mamy taki komentarz.
We have a comment online. It says, perhaps literature should set good example, should be a way for psychological rebirth of this passive generation. What do you think about this? So very quick feedback from you. Literature, this is what literature should do. Well, agreed. Literature should address such problems, and as a matter of fact, it does. Perhaps the question is, to ensure this contact between children and books. For us, for adults, is to enable this contact, is to stimulate it, is to teach the child use the book effectively so that they become really attached to literature, not only to gadgets. That's one of the challenges, one of the tasks. And there is empathy. Literature can also teach empathy. The internet doesn't teach empathy. That's my point as well. Well, literature can set a good example. A book can be a friend, can be an advisor. The book can do a lot. Of course, perhaps parents should fulfill this role, not a book, because there is no better example than the one set by parents, and parents are always the closest to the child. And perhaps parents should put their gadgets away and spend more time with their children. So honestly, I feel that parents these days are even sometimes more addicted to the internet than children. They got really immersed in the internet, and children suffer because of that. Before the pandemic, I did research among teenagers in our junior high school. Almost 1,000 students participated, and I asked them, what's the dearest thing to you? Because the stereotype is that this generation is very pragmatic, they only think about money and gadgets. And you wouldn't believe the first thing they said in the answers was family. And I asked them, what do you miss? So they responded, we miss contact, love, support from parents. So the book is great, but people, parents, the book is there to make generations get together. We can, of course, sit over a book and talk. This can be a bridge also between parents and children, between generations. Well, thank you for these very, very insightful comments, all these thoughts you shared with us.
Bardzo Państwu dziękujemy za udział w dyskusji.
Thank you very much. I think perhaps we have one more. Perhaps we have one more question from the room, and this is the very last one.
То мені було цікаво, на каком языке? На русском? Да, на русском. Мне был интересен вопрос, как можно бороться с пониманием того, что...
I got interested in a question. We have this generation Z and Y, and how can we prevent mobbing at work, for example? A young person who comes to work, how they can fight for boundaries, for respecting certain limits, because there is this generation division also at work. How do we respect these boundaries between generations? How to be in harmony?
Я могу ответить, если можно.
I can take this question if you're okay with this.
Да? Меня слышно? Меня слышно? Как предприниматель, как совладелец компании, я
As an entrepreneur,
молодых людей, и у нас в компании
I have young people on board, and most of our personnel are young people, 20 plus, a few 30 plus, and actually very few people around 40. This is how our team was put together when we were starting. And actually we were looking for professionals, and young people proved themselves to be real professionals, regardless of young age. And then when you are in this team at work, everything depends on competence. And the level of communication they manage to establish. That's the key criterion. If this communication works, if it has high quality, it doesn't matter what generation you belong to. There is understanding. And I don't think that people in business somehow pay much attention to it. They need good atmosphere at work, and they need results. That's why I don't really think that we should really worry about having different generations and people paying attention to the fact that someone is younger or older. If you're open, if you do what you're supposed to do, the point is to hire people or have people on board who kind of test this temperature, who can empower communication. So in many mature companies, they have HR departments that help people communicate effectively, that train people in effective communication, and they help them keep a good ambience at work. Thank you. Thank you very much for this final answer. We have to really close this meeting. Please applaud our panelists, our guests. Thank you. And finally, two reflections I'd like to close with. Social media, the internet, and this environment is very, very interesting to discuss. My personal reflection, if I may share one. I have a 15 and 18-year-olds at home, and there are just 3 years of difference between my sons. They have two completely different ways of using social media or using gadgets. For the older one, it's like one of many tools, like the press, the media, TV, or the cinema. He can switch between gadgets. He can even go without the internet. But for the younger one, only 3 years younger, a television, radio, or simply gadgets and a way to communicate or receive information, this is absolutely unnecessary. The only thing he needs is a charged smartphone connected to the internet, and he doesn't need anything else. That's the whole reality that he's in. That's his environment. He cannot go without it. And the other idea that crossed my mind, and you also raised it, is the pandemic and how this pandemic has changed our relationship with the world and our relationship with the world of young people. Maybe this is not everywhere, but in Poland, for many months, young people were locked at home, separated, isolated from the natural environment of their peers. And we saw this horrible data. So during maybe our future congresses, we will be returning to this subject, or the subject will be returning to us. So today we had with us Marjana Sawka from Ukraine, Birute Marcinkieviciute-Mar from Lithuania, Yevgenia Pasternak, Andriej Żwalewski from Belarus. And this discussion was hosted by Piotr Marecki. Thank you.
A przed nami trzeci dzień kongresu.
Tomorrow we are back here for the last day of the Congress. We will devote the last day to culture. We will start with a panel at 10 o'clock, culture and economy. We will have Jerzy Hausner, former Deputy Prime Minister, with us, and one of the most important figures in Polish culture, writer, diplomat, long-term director of Adam Mickiewicz Institute, Paweł Potoroczyn. We will hear from Paweł Czapliński, Professor Czapliński, about the growth of doubt. He will refer to the output of some leading Polish writers, and we will also see a presentation of a street art project, Różewicz Hartwig. This is, of course, because of the year of Hartwig, Różewicz and Lem this year. Then we have this workshop of On the Way to European Youth Capital. That will be the first chance to talk to representatives of former European youth capitals, Klaipėda, Tirana, Lviv, which is a candidate city, and of course Lublin. And finally, we will close this cultural part with a Art workshop entitled Culture Technology Accessibility. This is prepared by Labyrinth Gallery. We will have Professor Celiński, Waldemar Tatarczuk, and Violetta Stępniak, Monika Kubiel. And finally, I'd like to thank the personnel of the Office for International Cooperation and Department of Culture. They have prepared this meeting. I'd like to thank our interpreters. I'd like to thank for your effort, and everyone who has made it happen, made it possible. Technicians, everyone who supported us. See you tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. Have a good night.